Good morning, everyone. It's Nancy Narden, and I am happy to introduce our guest today, Steve Woods, who is a co-founder of Nudge, and Kyle Norton, who is a VP of Sales at League, as you can see here on the screen. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
We were talking earlier, they both happen to be, both companies are in Toronto, which is bidding for the new Amazon headquarters, so that's exciting. I'm calling in from Dallas, which I'm here for a conference of the Sales Enablement Society, so for those who are listening and are interested in meeting up with colleagues, that's a great grassroots society, so I urge you to check that out. But today, we're going to be talking about speaking of sales enablement, what is sales enablement? And there's lots of different types of technologies that people have to pick from, depending on what your objective is and what challenges you're trying to solve. So what we're going to do in this webinar, the first part is I'm going to have a conversation with Kyle. And Kyle is the one who, he's running a sales organization. He was facing some challenges, decided to use and implement Nudge in order to overcome those challenges and have some great outcomes. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to have Steve take us through a little bit, just a taste for what Nudge does, just showing you it in action to some degree. Before we get started, Steve, I'm going to ask you if you would please just tell us briefly how you would describe Nudge.
Sure thing. So we're a sales platform that helps relationship-based salespeople do their job effectively. So we measure, we monitor, we help you build relationships. We give you that understanding of relationships so you can move the deals along and you can get deals to the point where they're ready to close and not be surprised by that moment at the end of the quarter where the deal slips and then you realize that you didn't have the right relationships with the right people in the buying and decision-making organizations.
Okay, that's interesting because there's so many decision makers involved in any one decision now in a B2B environment. I know it's gone up from 5.4 to I think 6.8 according to CEB Gartner. So there's a lot of people, and anyone who sells to the enterprise would say there's no way there's only 6.8. There's a lot more that we're having to engage with. So relationships are key. Kyle, I'm going to ask you the same thing, but as a customer, how would you describe what Nudge does in about 2 sentences?
Very similar to what Steve said. It helps my reps and me as a sales leader identify the key relationships in the top accounts that we're going after to make sure that we're multi-threaded from rep to multiple buyers, multi-threaded from those buyers to myself, to the executive team, wherever we can leverage a relationship to help move a deal, get one open, get one closed, is really, really key for us.
Okay, so you said the magic words leverage a relationship because it's not about like mapping and doing an org chart of people. It's more about building those connections, that neural network of relationship connections, and making sure that you've got a way to get in and engage with the people you need to be engaging with.
Yep, for sure, and finding ways to strengthen that relationship through the social listening tools that Nudge can provide as well. So finding out what's going on in a company, how do we relate to that, how can we support that in other ways. As a head of sales, I can lend my network to the organizations that we're trying to sell into outside of the core business challenges that our product solves, but just trying to be helpful and extend those networks between the two orgs.
Okay, so we'll get into that more. Tell us about League and what does League do, just so we have some context, and maybe a little bit about your organization, and then you can maybe dive right into what were some of the challenges that you were facing that made you say, we really got to do something because it's impacting our revenue or keeping us from growing to the extent we wanted to grow.
Yeah. So League is a digital alternative to a traditional group benefits plan. So in Canada, companies have plans with Great-West Life, Manulife, et cetera. In the States, Aetna, United, all the major carriers. And it's a very antiquated business. It's paperwork heavy, slow, inefficient, and so we solve a couple different challenges. For the admin teams running HR, we make it seamless and easy to manage a very complex benefits plan, integrate that directly with their HR tool. For employees, we give them now digital access to something to get to the healthcare they need, and we've got a network of tens of thousands of providers on our network, from massage therapists to dentists, that a lot of whom will give you preferred pricing. And then outside of that core benefits offering, adding structure around that to on-site wellness programs, from stuff that's really simple like nutrition lunch and learns to ergonomic assessments, biometric screenings. We had an IV drip clinic here the other day, so people could get an IV drip and work away on their laptops, and really helping organizations become a wellness destination, because we know those companies perform better, they're more profitable, more productive.
What was in the IV?
I did not get one, but I think one of them was, so you could get a vitamin B12 shot, or like just a vitamin drip of all sorts of stuff. But I asked people who did it, and they said it was they felt refreshed and renewed. So
All right.
yeah,
Well,
I wasn't signing up for the needle though.
New employee perk then. Okay, so what was the challenge? I mean, there's a gazillion sales tech solutions out there that you can pick from, and not that because you went with Nudge you don't have other needs, but why did you decide, hey, we should use a solution like Nudge to help us with relationships?
So I think Nudge plugs into two pretty important things in your world: opening opportunities and getting them closed. So if you can show me a tool that will help me open more net new doors than I would have otherwise had, and help me convert more deals at the end of a cycle, it's a pretty compelling offering. Because what do I spend my entire day, my entire life doing? And trying to figure out how to generate more pipeline and then close it. That's essentially as simple as my life is. And so when I was exposed to Nudge, then it made a lot of sense. I'm selling into the Canadian market. We have a ton of connections to the companies that we want to get into, whether it's myself, my reps, or even more importantly, our executive team, to help get those conversations going. Because as good as my BDRs are, an email from our CEO to another CEO, probably going to get a better reply rate. And then at the end of deals, being able to strengthen relationships, identify problems as we're in that sort of 3-month engagement with a company, be able to better construct a solution around the things we learn about an organization through listening tools, and ultimately understanding the relationship map at the end of a deal to help us figure out what needs to get done and where deals might be at risk, because we don't have enough of a connection between my consultant and their implementation person, or between myself and the decision maker or the rep and whoever they're working with.
Mm-hmm. All right, so it sounds like Nudge reached out to you that maybe you weren't actively looking for, like who says, hey, I'm going to actively go look for social listening. I mean, it's kind of a new type of technology. So you were contacted and said, hey, I mean, who doesn't, like you said, need help getting in the door and making sure that's the second most important thing, is how do you get in the door. First most important thing is, are we trying to get in the right door? Once you know that, then you got to get in the door somehow, and so I think that's really what you're talking about. How were you figuring out, like, what, okay, so yes, we want to go ahead with this solution. What were you wanting to get out of it? Did you have certain metrics or objectives that you quantified?
Yeah, so we were in too crazy of a growth mode, I think, to sit down and quantify metrics and understand a baseline and then do a proof of concept. Like that's not how our business was running at the time. But a friend of mine said, hey, you should look at this tool. I just got all my reps to map their networks, and we found a bunch of easy, low-hanging fruit. So that's what we did. I downloaded the tool. This was like right when I started at League, so we were just trying to find some friendlies to prospect into. And I have 4,000 LinkedIn connections. So trying to go through LinkedIn and say, hey, do you know this person? Nobody knows anybody on LinkedIn anymore. So being able to use Nudge and understand relationship strength from me to my contact and from my contact to where I need to get to, that was really, really important. Like we got 10, 15 ops like week one just because that's where I started. Loaded in my account list, mapped the relationships, and a lot of them were at the exec level. My CEO is a well-known Canadian entrepreneur, so we saw who he was connected with. We went right for those accounts. Same thing with my network and people I knew. So that was a pretty quick win.
Yeah.
I didn't need data. I got a pretty good gut feel for the fact that 75% of my pipeline was stuff that was personal connections, and that was enough for me to try to want to scale this as a process a little farther.
Yeah, that's huge. I said a minute ago that the number one task is to make sure that you're selling to the right people, and number two was that you have a way to get in. But actually, number two is that you then prioritize the right people, and that you're going after the low-hanging fruit, and you're making sure that you've got that connection. And that, it sounds like it really surfaces who the low-hanging fruit is.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and Steve, we're going to have you, as I mentioned, show some of what it does. So the conversation can sometimes be a little bit difficult because we're not seeing it yet. But give us an example of maybe what it was like to implement Nudge. And so you mentioned that you loaded in a list, and then what happens after that?
Yeah. So the tool takes literally a minute to set up. You log in with your LinkedIn, you import your contact list and sync your accounts, and you're basically good to go. So it was more about thinking through the strategy of who we wanted to go after and how we could leverage the tool to get to those people. So implementation's easy, and they have an awesome team. The Nudge team is like a high touch customer service first organization. So I was working with a few of their CS people, and they would hop on calls with me, and they got new ideas from another client, and they would fire that over by email, and I loved it because that was great stuff. Amy, who's their head of CS, just sent me a bunch of stuff like 2 weeks ago, and I did the exact same thing. She said, "Oh, we got this idea." I cranked in our top 20 accounts that were in like middle funnel, and then we mapped all of the relationships. We looked at putting an exec sponsor on some of the key deals, and some of those are moving now that were otherwise pretty stuck. So I would say implementation is easy. The more difficult challenge is simply being savvy enough as a sales organization to think through like who you want to get to and how, and being smart about thinking about your deals and using a proper framework. And we use Medic, but you can use sort of any sort of system of understanding relationships and the people you're selling to and who's filling what role and how do we need to get these individuals on board. And once you can think through that, which most good reps should be able to do, then the tool will do what you want it to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, often when I talk to people who are looking for sales technology, they say, what can we get now that's going to give us a fast time to value? Because there's a lot of solutions that cost a lot up front. They require a lot of people to buy in, and it's got to work with this system and that system, and there's got to be training, and that's a huge effort. But there are a lot of solutions that you can get quick wins without having to go through all of that. And it sounds like when did you say, okay, we're going to do it, and we're going to get our licenses got up and running, and now you're using it? Like, how long did that take?
So Nudge at the time, and I'm not sure if it's like this now, was a bit of a freemium intake model. Like I could use the product for myself to start, and they got me up and running on it like in a couple minutes, and it was just about walking through some of the tips and tricks, like where to find that low-hanging fruit. And so time to value, I hadn't paid anything, and all of a sudden I had a bunch of ops. So when it comes time to talk contracts, then it's a little easier. But yeah, time to value, it's pretty instant. I would say it's you get value before you've had to pay something. And then you start to understand, okay, well, if I get my whole team on this and my team can see everything and I get my execs on it, then it's a pretty compelling value proposition to go from freemium one seat user to the team environment. So
Okay.
yeah, it's pretty instant value. And like I have to give the CS team a big shout out because I think they're awesome, but they were willing to engage and walk us through it, and we just had a bunch of our other reps go through some new training, like my higher level sort of commercial reps, and now they're all over the tool. So it's been the process of working with Nudge has been particularly strong, and I think that's underappreciated in the sales tech world. Like I have a couple vendors that are super high service, and they come with me to every company that I'm at, and that budget never goes away, no matter what gets done, because that tool is always providing value because the team is helping me deliver it.
Yeah. Well, as we're talking about time to value, I mean, we can also talk about what does that mean? What does value mean? And value, you can't get value if a team is not adopting the technology, and that's a huge risk for a lot of organizations when they buy new technology is, okay, it sounds great, it sounds like it can do what we need it to do, if our salespeople actually use it.
Yeah.
And that's often a big if, and companies, quite frankly, are skeptical now. They've been burned before because it sounded good, but yet then salespeople don't use it. Now that money and all that time is wasted.
Yeah.
You can find out pretty quickly, it seems like, whether or not like Nudge is going to work, because it doesn't. There's not a lot of implementation. You just try it in a free trial, and you start to see where your relationships are. And
Yeah.
I always say, if sales, no one has to convince a salesperson to use their cell phone or to use their email client because it provides value. Well, if you're not having to convince your salespeople to use the social relationship tool like Nudge, then it's because it's providing value.
Yeah, and you're naturally going to have people who are fast adopters and are going to take a tool and run with it, and you're going to have people that are a little slower. And so there's always tips and tricks. I don't want people to use Nudge because I want to use the tool. I want them to use Nudge because I think it's going to accelerate pipe. And so ultimately, you just have to show them how to get value in their own day-to-day. And so one of the things, like when I want to implement a tool that could be burdensome, not necessarily this, but then give it to your top reps, spend time and get the vendor to spend time with them, make sure they're up and running with it, and they'll see all the other reps are going to see them using it and getting value and moving a deal and say, oh, this just happened on a deal. Oh, this thing was stuck for 2.5 or a month and a half, and then we got our X person to send an email, and then all of a sudden somebody responded to my email that I sent them like 3 weeks ago. And you just hear that story on the floor, and they're like, wait, like, so what did you do? And they're like, oh, well, I just used Nudge. And then obviously the person comes to me and be like, why don't I have this? Actually, everybody has a license, so go log in. And you just not too many tools at once, and just make sure that you're consistent with the training, and you're going to retrain on things every couple months to make sure things get done properly.
Okay, so how do your salespeople use it on a day-to-day basis? And more to the point, how does it fit into their normal workflow?
Yeah, so it depends on what they're doing. If they're prospecting, then they're going to take their account list, bring it into, like, before they start doing anything with their account list, they're going to bring it into Nudge and see where we have relationships. That should be the starting point. Because as soon as you're talking low and then you have to go high later because you have a relationship you didn't realize you had, it's not a great experience for the person that you're speaking with. Feels like you've gone over their head. So the first things first is try to map exec relationships and start there. Because if we can get in high, then we can consistently go back to that person. Hey, wanted to give you a heads up. We had a great meeting with your team, and like it's the courtesy loop in, so that you never lose that touch point. Like if I get pushed down and then I'm working with this team, and then when the deal's stuck, I go back. to that person at an exec level, that's, again, it's going to feel bad to your buyer. So mapping the relationships and keeping those relationships through the deal is important. And then when things do get stuck, or when we start getting late stage and we're moving into negotiation and legal, understanding the connectivity between the two organizations, and maybe I need to go back in with an email to somebody senior, or maybe our CEO needs to hop back in and just send a quick one-liner, and that's enough to get us a response. So in their day-to-day, it's just about how they're moving deals, and they largely log into the Nudge platform to do that.
They log into the Nudge platform to do that, you say?
Yeah, and I know there's some integration, so it's built into a few other tools as well. There's a Salesforce integration, there's a SalesLoft integration, so I know the reps use it that way. But I personally could just go into the Nudge tool because I want to view those lists that I built and see.
Okay. Looks like, let me check. Okay, good. There you are. And I think we have a question. Let me just check here. And this is a good time to just mention, if you do have a question, go ahead and put it in the panel there. We'll try to get to it when the time is right, or at the end. Let me just check and see what this one is asking about. Okay, so yeah, let me go ahead and ask this here, because it's about, when does Nudge work best? I'm going to paraphrase this. When does it work best? Like, do you have to have so many people that are all participating on Nudge in order for it to work? When does the economy of scales come in?
So it's going to work better the more people you have on the platform, for sure. I used it as sort of a one-off mapping of my own relationships when I was first starting and cranking up the team. But yeah, as we've gotten our CEO, CHO, sort of the exec layer of the team on the platform, it's become exponentially more powerful. Because ultimately people were doing it in LinkedIn and be like, hey, Mike, do you know this guy? Hey, Mike, do you know this woman? And it's like, no, or it's a back and forth. If instead we just say, hey, strong relationship here to there, we know this, he can introduce me to that woman or man. It's, yeah, the more the better.
Okay, so essentially what's happening is that you load your contacts or your accounts into the system. Your contacts from LinkedIn. Is that what we're doing?
So I pulled a list from Salesforce. Yeah, so you're going to sync your contacts from LinkedIn. You're going to sync your email and your Facebook, and those are the places where I think Nudge is understanding relationship strength. Mm-hmm. But then where I get the most value is I take my account list from Salesforce, so the top accounts by for us it's ACV or by employee size that are in sort of like a tier 1, and I'm going to put them in a list that I can, 1, watch, and then 2, understand relationship mapping. And so, like I just did this probably 2 weeks ago. Bring in all the top 20 accounts from November. Look at where we can accelerate, because if we're not post proposal by now, then a November close is going to be tough. So we need to look at velocity, because we're starting to have a good understanding of our sales cycles and velocity. And then I just look through this account list. It maps all of the contacts that are there, regardless if they're in the opportunity or not. And then I'm going to ping my network. It might be internal to League. I think those are the best ones, but I've used it externally as well. If I can see a friend has a really strong relationship and I have a strong relationship with this colleague, I'll definitely ping them. I do that with some of the Nudge guys sometimes. Hey, notice you're connected.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Okay, so you're using it to figure out where your relationship connections are, and you mentioned something about velocity, and I'm wondering if you've noticed, for instance, that more deals close if you have X number of contacts that you're communicating with. I mean, are you starting to get metrics that maybe you couldn't get before?
Yeah, I think that's should be a commonly understood thing about selling, is that the more people that you're engaged with and the more threads you have into our organization, the faster your deals are going to move, and the higher percentage they're going to close. So Nudge allows you to map that relationship strength, because oftentimes you get a rep who's got the rose-colored glasses on. Oh yeah, this person says that it's going to come in and they're selling it internally, but like if I'm not able to go have a conversation with somebody more senior and just like check in and get something honest, or my CEO is not able to like go in over the top to the COO or whoever he knows and say, hey, I know our teams are talking, was wondering if you've heard anything, like that's going to be the real insight, because your buyers, especially like we sell to Canadians who are very polite and don't want to tell you no, and so people have a hard time just like telling you if something's not going to happen. So if I can go in, because at some point I was in a meeting with the CFO and my rep is talking to the head of HR, then I can go to that person and say, hey, wanted to check in. I know this is going on. Like and this is oftentimes when the contact goes dark on my account executive. I can get some insight. And again, going back to
angles.
Yeah,
you can
and prioritize
approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so oftentimes I can get more direct feedback, or my CEO gets the most direct feedback. Hey, talk to my team. They said they didn't like this, this, and this, and we can go in and finally address that, because oftentimes your buyer says, oh no, it's just the timing. That's never just the timing. It was, you don't have credibility. I didn't think that it's going to do this or that, and I just didn't like your rep. Like, there could be a number of things, and at least we can now we can start fixing the deal, because oftentimes you lose a deal just because there's problems in it that you didn't know.
Yeah. So I've heard you talk a lot about like a stuck deal, a deal that just doesn't seem to be going anywhere. But does it also, are you finding that you can also like shorten a sales cycle because you can make sure it doesn't get stuck? Like,
yeah, for
does
sure.
That come in?
Yeah, I would say if there's more relationships and more trust built, and there's more opportunity to have them verify us through the fact that they know another client of ours, or they know somebody that we've had past dealings with, then yeah, for sure it's going to positively affect your velocity. But deals are naturally going to get stuck, and so you have to have a playbook for when that happens, because it's never going to get stuck. Your prospect's never going to say this is on hold because of these reasons, or this is going on in my life, or the business has had this change. Oftentimes you just stop getting response to emails and calls. So solving that problem with multiple relationships is really key.
And I think it's actually solving the problem for that particular prospect also, because sometimes people don't even really know. They just feel like something's not, like maybe they don't have enough good solid reasons, even though they really want it, or it just feels too complex and they're not sure where to go with it, and they can't articulate that to a salesperson, nor would they maybe. And so you can help them figure that out. It's a better customer experience, and then in the end they get what they need. You're really helping them buy.
Yeah, and I talk to my my AEs about this all the time. Like, we need to coach our prospects to be able to do this, and we need to coach them to be able to say no. After this meeting, you should be able to go back to your team, have a conversation, and then we can touch base. And if it looks great, perfect. Let's work together. And if it's not, walk me through what doesn't make sense to you. And some things I can solve, some things I can't. And then, like, it's a yes or no, and we can make a decision. And the more you enable your buyer to be honest with you and say no, and let you know what's on their mind, the better. Some of our biggest, most complex deals have been a lot of no's, because that's how it should be. And so having multiple connections, so between an AE, like on my team, it'll be the AE, the manager, the benefits consultant, and myself, and maybe somebody on the exec, and we can all be touching different pieces of this organization, because we really sell. Like, we're selling to the mid-market, so like 50 to 500 employees, and yet our deals feel like enterprise deals because benefits is the third biggest line item, and it touches every single employee. So we end up being very, very threaded in our deals.
Yeah. Well, the whole no topic can be topic for an entire webinar. I'm sure I have a friend who has a company called Go for No, and
Yeah.
they teach people that no is okay. It's okay to hear that. It's how you deal with it, and more importantly, from a motivational perspective, but also from an inner relationship perspective with the prospects. And actually, a lot of times, deals get harder, like really super hard, right before they're about to close.
Yeah.
And that's when, it's really going to happen or not happen. People start asking really tough questions. Are they going to go for it? So all of a sudden, it seems like things might fall apart when, in fact, it's a signal that the deal's about really ready to close. If you could just overcome that.
And that's the mark of an experienced rep, being able to understand that in a demo meeting, when you're getting drilled, okay, that's great, perfect. You're dealing with the right individual, because they're not just letting you do a demo and on Slack and doing their own thing. Like, they're engaged, they're thinking through how this might actually affect their organization. They're starting to picture themselves using this, and they're saying, oh, what about billing? Oh, people are like, well, we had so many tough questions. That's perfect, great. That's what you want.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to have Steve jump in just a second. I want to ask you if a couple questions, two more questions. First one is, were there any surprises? Anything you weren't expecting?
It's a very good question. Yeah, I mean, I was surprised by how quickly I was able to get things moving, because my original reps just plowed into it pretty fast, and I was actually surprised by how my junior reps actually leveraged their network. Like, you think that your junior reps are gonna, like, they don't have a network yet. They just got out of school. The people they know are in their lower 20s. Like, they're not making buying decisions in the places you want to be. But I was surprised by how quickly they had family connections or friends or somebody that is a mentor that has some other connection. So that was a bit of a surprise and a pretty good one. But no really big ones. Like, I know that relationships are really important to deals, and this was as soon as you see the tool, you're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. If you are a savvy seller, this should be like a pretty clear value prop.
Okay. Well, the last question I was going to ask is, do you have any advice for people? Maybe it's how do you get how you can get others in the organization to support the idea, or maybe it's be sure to cross this T and dot this I.
Yeah. So anytime you're trying to get budget for a new tool approved, I always encourage people to not do what we do and fly by the seat of our pants and have no data. I was just building our Salesforce instance at the time, so it wasn't necessarily there. But if you can mark those deals with like a simple custom field, or just find a way to relate the opportunities that you've generated by using the free product, or mark them to start understanding velocity, like the more data you can bring to that internal pitch when you're looking for dollars is really important. But I would encourage people to download and use the free tool, and the product's sort of going to speak for itself. If it works for you, it works for you, and if not, then it's not going to be a compelling reason to buy. But most of the time, I have a feeling it's, if you know what you're doing and you give it a good effort, you should get opportunities and velocity out of even the free tool. Because Steve's team will make sure you have the tips and tricks and all the savvy insider.
They won't let you not use it, right? Yeah. Okay. So
exactly.
I'm going to bring you in now, Steve, and ask you to just show us what it is we've been talking about and what it looks like.
Sure thing. Glad to. And thank you. Thank you, Kyle, for all of the details there. So I'm actually going to start my demo not in Nudge. I'm going to start my demo where, as we talked about, where people live, right? You live in your email, and if a tool is going to force you to adopt a new product, then it's not going to be a tool that gets adopted by anyone on a normal sales team. So for your average salesperson, I'll talk managerial stuff in a second, but for your average person using the Nudge product, you go through that very quick, simple setup for the free product. It snaps into the side of your email, your Salesforce, your SalesLoft, wherever you exist as a salesperson, and what you get requires no effort. So you're in an interaction with somebody. Here I've got an email from Vic. I can see all of the details that I need to know about Vic, his company, and the relationships around Vic. So you can see here, as Kyle mentioned earlier, sort of my own relationships. So I can see here you'll see this little chart everywhere in Nudge that shows the current strength of this relationship in dark green and where it used to be at its max. So I've lost touch with Vic. We used to have a very strong relationship, and that's kind of died off over time, which is unfortunate and very much on me. You can see some of the data here. It's been a while. You can also see around Nick. So, well, who actually does know Vic very well? And Sean is somebody that knows Vic very well. I can drill in and I can see details on his company, who else I know there, what's going on in the news, what's going on in social media, any of the conversations that are happening at that organization. I've got all of the relationship information that I need surrounding it, which is as a concept of how salespeople interact with the product, because it's there and all you do is go about your day-to-day life. But if we then step one step forward and say, okay, well, how do I now turn that into something a little bit more interesting? And what we will then do is we take your network, as Kyle mentioned, we sort of bring that all together from wherever it is, your CRM instance, all the contacts that you've got, etc. Pull that all together and start focusing in on what's going on with that network. So we do a ton of research, and we look at about 80,000 content items a day, and we map that against the people in your network, the organizations that you're trying to get into, what is interesting to them, what's interesting to you, and we give you these little nuggets that say, okay, well, this is interesting. So Scott Brinker, who's VP of Platform Ecosystems over at HubSpot, well, he was just in the news. He was just in this article about MarTech being everywhere. So I can start to drill in here and say, okay, well, does this give me something interesting to work with? And I can very quickly go and sort of look at that article and see, okay, Scott's in it. David also was mentioned. Scroll down quickly and get a sense of that. Okay, so here's Scott. I can see it's about marketing getting ingrained in the entire company. Wonderful. I've got some context. So maybe I want to keep that relationship with Scott and with HubSpot moving forward. Look and see, okay, so I want to see, are there any other conversations going on between my organization and HubSpot? And I can see, well, this is interesting. Paul and Nick on our sales team are having conversations at HubSpot. So I can drill in here very quickly and see, are there toes that I'm going to step on here? And I can get that sort of real-time chart of who is talking to who. Well, this is interesting. Okay, well, Paul's actually talking to Scott Brinker already and a couple of other folks. I don't need to worry about Nick talking to other people within the organization, worry about there. So I'm able to see, okay, well, this is kind of interesting. I know that there may be some toes that I'm stepping on here. I've got a nugget. I can move that relationship ball forward. I'm just going to look across the entire graph first, and I'm going to see maybe there's other name dropping that I want to do here. So I can see, well, this is interesting. Jill, who I know very well, you saw from that sort of Wi-Fi signal there, great relationship with Jill. Well, Jill actually knows Scott and Brian and a few other folks extremely well at HubSpot. I just had lunch with Jill the other day. So now I'm starting to see this picture come together. I know who's in conversations with HubSpot. I've got this nugget. I know who I want to reach out to. I've got that social graph, and I can very quickly say, all right, well, maybe I'll reach out to HubSpot, not just Scott. I'm going to reach out to some of the other folks that I know here. So Scott's going to be a key person, and Brian also. So I'll just kind of drop that in here. And hey, was having lunch with Jill, etc., etc., etc. So very quickly, without me as a salesperson needing to adopt any new tools, any new technology, any new approaches, I was given the research, the nuggets, and all of that social context around it that give me the sense of, hey, there's an opportunity for me to just kind of kick that one ball forward a little bit. And I can focus that in. You can see here, it's all list-based. I can focus that in on the deals that are in my cycle, on the opportunities that are early stage, that are late stage. I can bring those across from Salesforce, and I can focus that in any way that I want, and all I'm doing is just building those relationships and moving those relationships forward little bit by little bit.
Mm-hmm. And I know Jill, and one of the things she talks about is, in addition to always be connecting, the new ABC she calls it, but also give before you get, or before you ask to get. Hopefully I'm not butchering it too much, but the whole idea is, don't ask for something when wait to talk to someone until you need something from them. If you're constantly building relationships and finding ways to communicate, maybe even offer up some help. Hey, I saw this article, and it looks like you should really know so-and-so, and if you don't already, I'm happy to introduce you. I mean, to always be offering and staying in front of a prospect, which would be really nearly impossible to do without any kind of technology to support you doing that.
Absolutely. I think what people maybe underappreciate there is you don't have to save the world in those interactions. The smallest thing that you remembered something about them, you noticed something about them. Hey, they were just they were just at a conference, they were just on a panel, they were just in the news, they just had some kind of witty quote that came out. Just notice it. Just mention that. Thumbs up. All good. And that relationship has moved forward. You're closer to top of mind with that person. It doesn't have to be about the product you're selling or the ROI that it would deliver to the organization. You don't have to be in that close mode all the time. You just have to move those relationships along as you would as a human. And gradually, what you start to see is that graph starts to close in, and you're able to say, okay, well, now we're actually very, very connected with this organization. We're up and down the organization, internal to the company. Paul, who's on my team, we saw had a lot of relationships with HubSpot. Jill, who is not part of the Nudge team, has relationships with HubSpot. But I'm able to surround that social graph there and really get that understanding of, okay, well, how are we connected into that organization, and what relationships can I build further? What relationships do I need to build further in order to make that access point much more clear?
And you humanize the sales process. I think that's one of the big things is, we get it, myself and my team, we get into sales mode, and we're always selling, and people don't believe things that salespeople tell them. And this process, I do this all the time. I forgot to mention the daily nudge. Almost every single day I get it, I send one message, one little LinkedIn thing or one email. Hey, saw that, that's awesome. And it could be super, super brief, but it just humanizes this whole interaction because people need to feel comfortable doing business with you. And if they can see you as a person and not as a sales individual, then you'll be able to get things done.
I think there's that.
I was just going to say, when the person asks a question about how many people do you need to have using it in an organization for it to be value, the answer really is just you, because of sort of this aspect of it. Yes, for the relationship connections and all that, it helps to have more people, but to be able to just stay on top of all the outreach that you need to do, this makes it easy, and you don't need to have anybody else using it.
And for your career, I mean, even if you're not working and moving deals ahead, just being able to keep in touch with people and give to give. Like, I speak at lots of events and do lots of mentorship and help people just because it's, I'm passionate about the Toronto technology community and the sales community, and just staying engaged with people and finding ways to build your network. The Nudge guys always say your network is your net worth, and I'm very much a subscriber to that opinion. So there's oftentimes, one out of every 4 emails I send from that daily nudge is just to somebody that I've met that's doing something cool that I want to send them a note on, and just because it's people.
Yeah,
people want that. People crave to know that somebody's out there and listening and just showing
what they're doing matters.
interest. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And what you'll see so many times where that one little movement that you start there, just reaching out to somebody, well, they bump into somebody else the next day, and a topic comes up, and then your name gets mentioned, and so even though you're giving to give, the amount of times that karma comes back and it turns into an opportunity or some positive motion is tremendous. It's super valuable at a very sort of fuzzy, non-measurable level. But the nice thing too is, if I flip, okay, here we are as a salesperson building relationships with the organizations and the people and the accounts that matter. You can flip around a little bit, and I can say, okay, well, that's all well and good, but what's going to close this quarter? And I can look at I can come in now as a head of sales, and I can come in and say, well, let me look at the deals that are late stage pipe and their forecast to close, as an example. Well, how are our relationships going at those organizations? Our rep with Happy Years has said, hey, we're about to close this deal. This is fantastic. Well, you can pull up this analytical view within Nudge that says, okay, for those organizations, where do you have strong relationships, the dark blue bar here, and where do you have weak relationships, that lighter blue bar? And if there's an organization that is forecast to close where you have, you've got a handful of weak relationships, or maybe you've got one strong relationship and nothing more, that's a red flag. You've got a rep with Happy Ears saying, oh, I got this. And they've got probably a mid-level, junior-level manager who's enthusiastic but hasn't done the work to close the deal. So with Nudge, you kind of, and I think Kyle really introduces very well, you've got this very human relationship-building aspect to it, but at the same time, the analytics around where are your risk factors in deals that are going to slip at the end of the quarter because your reps have not pushed them forward enough and built the right relationships and gone sort of deep and wide enough into the account, the analytics of that relationship really gives you a cutting insight into what is going to happen in the revenue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just looking to see if we have questions. We are actually officially out of time now, but I think there's a question. I just want to see if I, let's see here. Echoing what Kyle just said, oh, this was from 10 minutes ago, so what you just said 10 minutes ago, Kyle.
Okay.
Like it would be a great tool for those in the job market selling themselves for opportunities, not just for sales reps. And yeah, I mean, you don't want to get nudged so your salespeople can be looking for their next job, but it's sort of a byproduct is you are building your own brand and you're building your own connections, your own network, which, as you said, is your net worth. So yeah. Yes, I agree, Jennifer.
Yes and no. You don't necessarily want your reps looking around for their next gig, but if your organization is an organization that helps people move on consistently bigger, better, exciting things, then you'll do pretty okay. I always, you see so many sales leaders and like, oh, this guy quit and I can't believe he did that to me. Well, you don't own that person. They're trying to do the same as you, advance their career, do fun and exciting things. And I think as sales leaders, I'm getting off topic now, but as sales leaders, if we can enable people to have that mobility, move within your own company, connect with people, then ultimately you'll be better off because the people that are my alumni, I'm excited for them to be in awesome places, and a bunch of them work with me again now here, and if you can just lead from a place of like genuine interest for their advancement, like you might lose one or two people in the short term, but you'll win in the long term, and Nudge is great for that.
It plays off the whole theme of giving to give. So,
give to give, yeah.
Give to give. Well, thank you so much. You gave to me and to our audience, and I appreciate that. It's great for us to be able to share folks like yourself, your experiences, so that they can learn and be better and understand what their options are. So thank you both for joining today.
Thanks for having me. I don't want to be too much of a shill, but go download Nudge. You won't be upset.
Thanks,
All right.
Kyle.
There you go. There's your takeaway. So,
Yeah.
and yeah, and check out our website to see what webinars are coming up. We have a webinar like this almost every week. I thank you for joining, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for having us.